Now, doctors,
The senator's
agency.
time has expired. Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. This bill covers a range of reasonably complex issues that are not really related, and I just want to give my thoughts on the separate issues that arise in this bill. Listen with interest to Senator Day's speech, and I've heard those sorts of comments before at an inquiry which the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Legislation Committee conducted into a similar bill, a Dying with Dignity bill, some time ago. I also heard the other side of the story, and Madam Acting Deputy President, at that committee hearing we had evidence from a youngish man who was supported at the hearing by his wife and young children, who clearly indicated his wish to be able to get medical assistance to terminate his life when things got to a stage where his cancer was just intolerable. And, Madam Acting Deputy President, I am a reasonable human being, I think. I would hope that hopefully it'll never happen to me, but if I did get to a stage where I've seen many of my relatives, saw many people in this inquiry get to, I would want the right to make my own decision on how long I stayed on this earth in absolute agony, without any friends, without any relatives, sitting there more or less just waiting for the days to pass until I died. And I would like to have that ability to make my own decision. And in spite of what Senator Day has said and others, the bills that we looked at all did have safeguards. It's not a matter of other people killing people, and there was a lot of emphasis on the word kill. It was about those who were able to make a decision, getting a medical practitioner to assist with the termination of life without that medical practitioner being legally responsible for some crime. And so, Madam Acting Deputy President, I guess if I did want to terminate my life, I don't need legislation, I really don't need a doctor, I don't need anything. I mean, you know, there are lots of ways. You can slit your wrists, you can steal a gun and blow your brains out, you can do many things. But it would be nice to be able, once you're able to make the decision, and this only applies to people who can make the decision, it doesn't apply to children or people who are of unsound or infirm minds. It's only where you can actually make the decision yourself, and in some of the bills we've looked at, that required one or two even psychiatrists to certify that you are capable of making a decision. But, Madam Acting Deputy President, as I say, anyone can terminate their life, but when that time came, you would hope that you might be able to get some medical help to do it in a reasonably dignified way. Madam Acting Deputy President, my views are, of course, my own, but they were reinforced by the instance of my mother, who was a wonderful person, a very Christian lady, very helpful to her family and everyone else in the community. She had a stroke. One side of her body was paralysed. She couldn't speak, couldn't write, but she learnt to say a few words. She learnt to write left hand. She spent 8 years in a hospital fighting it, you know. She got to a stage, though, Madam Acting Deputy President, where all she wanted to do was get out of this life, and she couldn't. It was almost funny. She'd play hide and seek with the nurses. They'd keep giving her pills every day. She'd put them in her mouth until the nurse went, then she'd take them out and throw them under the bed. And every week the nurses would do a search of her room and find a little cache of pills that she's supposed to be taking to keep her alive. But she, they sort of beat her there, but she eventually starved herself to death. And that's not a nice way to go. And, she didn't have any money, the family were all supportive, but she wanted to go. And the only way she could do it in the end was by refusing to eat food. And that was an awful way to go. And just in the last year, I've seen the same situation with my sister. And, I spent as much time with her as I could. But she used to often say to me, "Oh, Ian, if only I could go, if only I could leave." And I used to encourage her the other way, but she wanted to go, but I again sat and saw her go through this over a period of 6 or more months. And I often said to my wife as we were coming home from visiting my sister, we wouldn't do this to our cat. In fact, we had a cat, and we were very attached to the cat, but the cat had very difficult diseases. And we'd spent a fortune on the vet, but eventually we paid the vet to come and do a home visit, and we sat with the cat on my knee while the vet terminated its life. Because, we just couldn't bear to see the cat go through that sort of agony. And yet, when it comes to people, we sort of tolerate it. So, Madam Acting Deputy President, everyone will have their own views on this. When this matter did become before the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Legislation Committee, the only recommendation of the committee, apart from some technical legal things, was that if this matter ever came to a vote in a parliament, party leaders should allow it to be a conscience vote. And so that was as far as the committee would want to go. But for these reasons, and I've mentioned them in these sorts of debates before, I would favour some sort of medically assisted termination of a life with all of the safeguards. I don't share Senator Day's horrible thoughts about humanity and all of the issues he says of people wanting to kill, in his words, others because they'll get the property quicker or they'll get the money quicker or they don't have to bother. I don't think most people are like that. Sure, there'll be some like that in this world, but I think most people in the world wouldn't fit that category. So, Madam Acting Deputy President, I just want to briefly go on to the other aspect of this bill, which again causes some complexity. I think I was Territories Minister when the last referendum came forward for the Northern Territory, and I think a lot of people in the Northern Territory wanted to be a statehood, but I have to say the government at the time, which was the government of my persuasion, and I think they confess this, they completely messed up the process, and as a result the bill went down, the referendum went down. Madam Acting Deputy President, so I have a bit of a feel for the Northern Territory. I think I would like to think they could become a state and be like everyone else, but the total population of the Northern Territory is about 250,000 people, which is about the same size as the regional city in which my office is. Townsville has about 250,000 people. Can the Northern Territory afford to run a state? Can it afford to pay its own way? I doubt it. And if that's the case, if they're going to continue to rely on Commonwealth finance, what's the purpose of it? There is talk, it would give them greater representation in the federal parliament. Instead of having 2 lower house members, they might have more. Instead of having only 2 senators, they might have 12. But again, a state with 250,000 people having 12 senators, and my town of Townsville sharing 12 with the rest of the state, but having 1 only based in that city is me. Well, if it's going to happen in the Northern Territory, well, perhaps we should get 12 senators in Townsville as well. And so, whilst that's a ridiculous proposition, it does show the difficulties. On balance, I'd be happy enough with the Northern Territory becoming a state, I guess, but I don't think it's really practical, and I'm not sure that in the end result it's what most Northern Territorians would seriously want. With the ACT, I have a different view, Madam Acting Deputy President, and it's not the colour of the government, I might hasten to add. But I do think the ACT is the seat of the national capital of Australia, and I do think that the Australian Parliament should retain some sort of ability to oversight what happens in this city-state, city-territory, which is really not a state, but a Commonwealth, a federal institution, being the national capital. And of course the founding fathers of the country in those early days thought long and hard about where the capital should be. Should it be Sydney, Melbourne? That couldn't happen. And a lot of thought was put into where and how the capital of the nation should operate. And that's why I always think that the federal parliament must retain some influence over what the governance of this state is. I'm very conscious that many Canberrans didn't even want self-government, and when you look around I can understand why, because they used to get the rest of Australia to pay the taxes from the rest of Australia into building infrastructure in Canberra, and so if you're a Canberran, why would you want to take that on yourself? You know, Canberra is a very, very favoured city. It's a lovely life living here. It's a beautiful city built by the taxes of everybody else, not just Canberrans. But look, I do think it needs to be some Commonwealth oversight of the national capital. As I say, I remember the first election, I think there were 3 candidates elected who were the No Self-Government Party. I think there was a 4th who had a similar view. And, you know, I've always thought that, in retrospect, perhaps the best idea for Canberra would have been to have had a local government with perhaps some additional powers, but with the Commonwealth retaining a big influence in what happens in what is effectively the city of all Australians, not just of Canberrans. So, Madam Acting Deputy President, with those few words, I'm conscious other people want to speak on this debate. They're the way I see this particular bill and other bills that have been like this, and I guess it's a debate which will continue for a long, long period of time into the future.